Hi, it's Penny here, and today I wanted to talk about some new releases that are coming up in August, as well as some of the books that I have recently discovered and added to my Goodreads to read list. And this month I actually only have 2 releases that I'm excited for this month. We seem to be a bit short on releases, but maybe I'm missing things. If I am, let me know down in the comments. So the first book I'm interested in is coming out on August 11th, and that is Star Daughter by Sveta Thakra. I'm probably terrible at saying that one, but for starters, this is just a really beautiful book. But as well, it is about a daughter of a star and a mortal, and it incorporates Hindu mythology, which I'm always really interested when fantasy novels incorporate different kinds of mythology. Especially Hindu mythology is one I know just a little bit about, but I would love to know more, so it's a good opportunity for that. I am a little bit nervous because it's YA fantasy, and I have been struggling to find YA fantasy that I like recently, but I think that's more of a me problem than a YA fantasy problem, so we will see how we go. The other book that I'm excited about is The Nemesis by S.J. Kincaid. So this is the 3rd book in the Diabolic series, which is all about this genetically engineered bodyguard who ends up having to take the place of the girl that she protects in order to protect her, and along the way she learns a lot about herself. This is also set in a world where they have all this fancy technology, they're traveling all through space, but using that technology and understanding it is banned. So like books are banned, they're not allowed to learn how to use any of this stuff, and so slowly it's all falling to bits. Also, the 2nd book had like a dash of like time travel, more like relativity, and some of the other characters did some really unexpected things, so I really have no idea what direction this 3rd book is going to take, but I've been waiting for it for a while and I'm super excited about it. So then let's talk about some of the other books that I've discovered over the last couple of months, I think, because I didn't do one of these videos last month. Also, I've added a lot of books, so let's try and go through things relatively quickly. These are basically just books that I have heard about while I'm watching Booktube or my other journeys around the internet, and someone has said something that made me interested in reading this book. I really should be being careful with this at the moment, but I'm not. I'm just adding things on all the time, regardless of how many books I already have to read. So firstly, I have Stepsister by Jennifer Donnelly, and I always think this is Jennifer Connelly, but it's not. It's Jennifer Donnelly. And I added this after Sarcasm and Sci Fi talked about it and said it was obviously a Cinderella retelling, but it had like an interesting feminist twist to it. So I thought, why not? I will skip over the ones I've added on here that are books that I recently hauled. I'll link my haul over here if you want to check that one out. Then I also have a few books here written by New Zealand authors. I was doing some research trying to find some more recently released New Zealand works, especially ones that include Maori mythology or some kind of Maori heritage. Really, I was trying to find books by Maori authors that also looked like books I would enjoy, and I have been struggling to find some. So if you have any recommendations, leave them down below, but I will keep looking. But one that I did find is Into the Mist by Lee Murray, and the synopsis kind of gives me Annihilation vibes. It says that this military person has to give these civilian contractors an escort into the national park, this big forest area, and then they end up with death on their tails. It sounds really dark and creepy, so that's another plus. I did also add Mutu Whenua, The Moon Sleeps by Patricia Grace. So this is a book published just before I was born, and I think it's just about a Maori woman having a relationship with a Pākehā man, Pākehā being the Maori word for a white person. I think it's just a story about how she keeps her identity while being in that relationship, I think. Another older one, because all the lists that I found seem to just have older books by New Zealand authors, but I did find The Bone People by Kerry Holm. This, I think, is just a story about a woman who forms a relationship with this strange boy that breaks into her house and tries to steal from her, and also his foster father. I don't know much more than that, but again, I think it's looking at relationships between Maori people and white people. Then I also got Ruined by Paula Morris, who is another New Zealand author who I think is part Maori, although this book is set in New Orleans, and I think it's just some kind of YA paranormal ghost story, but I thought I'd give it a go. I actually really like the word ruined, so that was all I needed, really. I'm not going to explain why. Then I also added The Memory Police by Yoko Ogawa. So this, I think I've heard quite a lot of people talking about it lately. Initially, I think I heard about it from The Paper Traveler. And I think what happens is that these memory police can come and take away your memories of particular things. And then once your memories are taken away, you'll no longer understand that thing or observe that thing, even though that thing might still exist. So, for example, they could take away the concept of birds, and birds won't stop to exist, but you won't know about birds anymore. I don't know. It sounded totally weird and strange, and that's exactly the kind of thing that I like. Then I added The Wind-Up Bird Chronicle by Haruki Murakami. Now, I really need to read some Haruki Murakami books because I keep adding lots of books onto my want-to-read list by him because the concepts always sound so weird. I keep adding them because I like weird things, but I really should try something by him to see if I like books by him. This one, I think, is about a guy who starts looking for his wife's missing cat, but then his wife goes missing as well, and he ends up looking for her in a netherworld that lies beneath the placid surface of Tokyo, is what the synopsis says. I didn't make a note, but I think that it was actually Jesse the Reader who was reading this particular one recently, and he really enjoyed it. Also, I always like books with cats in them, so that's another reason why I added this one. Then I added 100 Years of Solitude by Gabriel Garcia Marquez. So this I added because I really enjoyed All the Crooked Saints by Maggie Stiefvater, which is a magical realism story. However, I've been recently reading the discourse around the fact that magic realism is primarily books with a Latinx inspiration to them, and so then really it should only be books written by Latinx people that count as magical realism. Honestly, I saw arguments on both sides by people of that heritage, and so I was confused, and I thought, you know what, since I enjoyed All the Crooked Saints, why not go and look at this book, which is apparently the book that came to define the genre magical realism. So I'll read that, and then maybe that'll give me clarity around what magical realism really is. Also, I just like really weird stuff, and I think that's what this is going to be. The synopsis doesn't really say much except that it's about balancing the need for solitude against the need for love, which again sounds like a really interesting theme, so I'm going to try it. Then I have Black Sun by Rebecca Roanhorse. So I've been really liking the Six World series by Rebecca Roanhorse, and this is going to be her new science fiction coming out in October, so I'm really excited for it. I don't really know what the synopsis is, but it sounds like another one that perhaps involves stars because it has celestial prophecies mixed in, it says, with the civilizations of pre-Columbian America. So cool. Sounds good. Then I added A Declaration of the Rights of Magicians by H.G. Parry. Primarily I added this because H.G. Parry is a New Zealand author, but also it seems to be like an alternate history where they're arguing for the legalization of magic, and that sounds like a pretty cool concept. Then I added The Scapegraces by Hannah Abigail Clark, and I admit I primarily added this one because I really like the cover, but it also says it's about outcast lesbian witches, so yes. Then I added Slay by Brittany Morris, so a lot of people have been talking about this one recently as well. It is about a girl who has worked on the development of this computer game, which is like a safe space for Black people, because we know that online gaming is not always the safest space for people that don't fit the white male norm in those spaces. So there's this computer game which is a safe space, but then there ends up being a murder related to this game, and things kind of blow up from there. As someone who works in software development, I thought that sounded like it might be interesting. Then I added The Deep by Rivers Solomon with Daveed Diggs, William Hudson, and Jonathan Snipes. This is a story about these mermaids that have come about because these African slaves were thrown overboard in history, and then they survived as mermaids. And there's one particular mermaid that holds all the memories for her people because those memories are quite traumatic, and so they just kind of give them to one person to worry about. One mermaid. Mermaids aren't people. But maybe they kind of are in this book. Anyway, I do really like mermaid books, and it sounds like this one might touch on some really interesting themes, so I added it. Then I added The Vanished Birds by Simon Jimenez. I got this one from a Black author recommendations video by Bowties and Books. This one does also include time travel, which I really like. I think that it's something about a woman who is somehow living outside of time, ending up having to look after this young boy. I don't know. I'm really just always on the lookout for good time travel books. So, on the topic of time travel, I also added The Future of Another Timeline by Annalee Newitz. So this one Starla Reeds was talking about, and it's some kind of like bureaucratic time travel. So there's also some society trying to make things better for women by changing the past. I think I've seen someone else talk about it too, and everyone I've seen talk about has given it really good reviews, so I am excited. I also added Akata Witch by Neri Okorafor, and I mainly added this one because Peru's Project was reading it, and I want to read some more Neri Okorafor other than Binti, which I read previously. I don't really know much about this one except that there is a young girl learning about her powers. Next, I added The Book of Longings by Sue Monk Kidd. So this is a Bible retelling, I think, except that it's an alternate Bible where we're following this woman named Anna, who is the wife of Jesus. I know that Carol Marie read it, and she said that it was a really interesting perspective and had some really interesting ideas in it. And even though I'm not religious, I do have an interest in the Bible and the mythology around the Bible, so it sounded interesting to me. Then I added Quality Land by Mark Ua Kling. So this is a book that Harriet Rosie was talking about, and it's about a shop where they have this algorithm that's so good that it can predict what you want before you want it. So they send out what you want before you even realize you want to order it. Again, it sounds like a really interesting concept, and apparently it's also quite funny, so I'm excited to read it. Then I added Exhalation by Ted Chiang. I recently read Stories of Your Life and Others by him, and those short stories were amazing. I absolutely loved it. This is another short story anthology, I think, and I just can't imagine that I wouldn't love it as well. Then I added The Mirror Man by Jane Gilmartin. So Eric at Breakeven Books was talking about this one, and it's about this guy who agrees to be cloned as part of this experiment, and he will basically step out of his life for a year and his clone will take over. No doubt everything goes wrong from there, but it sounded like a really interesting concept and perhaps has some similarities to Dark Matter by Blake Crouch, which I really loved, so that sounds great. Then I added Rules for Vanishing by Kate Ellis Marshall. A lot of people have been talking about this book, but it was Jen's bookish thoughts that really convinced me that I wanted to read it. It's a story about a girl who goes missing, and then these other children play this game where they try to go down this path that the girl went missing on and eventually find her, but you end up kind of in a different world. I'm sure that that's not really the synopsis, but it sounds like a really strange and mysterious book, and I love strange and mysterious books. Then I added The Dream Daughter by Diane Chamberlain. I added this because I saw Gabby Reeds talking about it, but I have seen a few people talking about it since then, and I believe it's about this woman in the 1970s. She gives birth to a baby with a heart defect, and there's nothing they can do about it at the time, but then her brother-in-law says, well, maybe we can do something about it, and there's some kind of time travel involved. Honestly, if it's a time travel book and someone says it's good, I'm adding it to the list. Next, I added Annihilation by Jeff Vandermeer. I actually thought I already had this on the list, but then when I was looking at Goodreads' recent top 100 science fiction books that they put up, this one didn't have Want to Read on it, and I don't know why, because I do want to read this. I have seen the movie already. Basically, this weird anomaly occurs, basically this location where when you go in, strange things happen, and the book follows a group of female scientists, as they investigate this anomaly. And I believe the book never gives the characters names. They're just referred to as the biologist, the psychologist, and like by their profession. Anyway, it's another strange book, so I want to read that. Also from that list, I added The Power by Naomi Alderman. So this is a book where teenage girls suddenly gain the ability to cause people immense pain or even cause death by touching people, and that changes the way that the world works quite significantly. I definitely want to read that, so I don't know why I hadn't added that before either. Then I added Invisible Differences, a story of Asperger's, adulting, and living a life in full color by Julie Duchess. So this one is a graphic novel memoir, I think, about this woman with Asperger's. Steph Loves was talking about it, and I thought it would be interesting and educational. Then I added The Past and Other Things That Should Stay Buried by Sean David Hutchinson. So a while ago I read The Apocalypse of Elena Mendoza by Sean David Hutchinson. Then I was talking about how much they love Sean David Hutchinson, and so I asked, what's the best book to start with if you wanted to get more into his work, and The Past and Other Things That Should Stay Buried was the recommendation. I have seen this book before. The cover is really cool looking. I think it's a story about a boy whose ex-best friend dies but then kind of comes back from the dead, and they have to kind of navigate what that means for their friendship. And that is most of the books that I've added to my Goodreads list recently. I skipped all the ones I hold, and I skipped all the ones that are just series continuations that I recently went through and tidied up, because if we went through all of those, we would be here forever. But anyway, those are lots of books that I'm excited about reading. I don't know when I'll get to all of them because there's always so many books to read and never enough time to read them in. But do let me know if you have read any of the books that I talked about today. Let me know whether you think they're worth reading. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching. I hope that you are doing well, keeping safe, and reading lots of good books, and I will see you next time.